Hi everybody, my name's Andrew and today I'm driving a 2019 Volkswagen Jetta GLI. If you followed me for a while, you've actually seen this car before. I did a video with this car, believe it or not, almost 2 years ago. And Evan still has it, and as such, he just wrote a 2-year review for me, and that's what we're going to be discussing in this video. We're going to be going over his thoughts and impressions after living with this car for the last almost 24 months. As a whole, the GLI can often be a little bit more unknown, as the GTI often takes the majority of the recognition in the Volkswagen lineup as far as performance cars go. But that's not to say it's a bad car. It's certainly not. We've discovered that in our previous video, and we'll talk more about that today as well. But it is likely that if the Jetta and the GLI name continue for another generation, which is still unknown yet, the GTI and Golf name will certainly almost always be more recognizable. Despite this, for many shoppers, the GLI actually offers 2 significant benefits over the GTI, one of which is the feature content. This car has a few things that were not available on a Mk7 GTI at all. Things like the fully digital gauge cluster or the ventilated front seats. You could not get either of those things on a GTI. You could get them on an R, but not a GTI, which is effectively the hatchback version of this car. Of course, the other thing is value. Of course, the market is continually changing, but at the time that this car was purchased, about 2 years ago, similarly equipped, similar mileage Mk7 facelift GTIs were on average $3,000 to $5,000 more than this car was. And this car, frankly, was already overpaid for. As you may be able to tell, over the last 2 years, the car has changed its appearance quite significantly, although in a very OEM plus type of way, which I personally love. The big thing you'll notice immediately is the wheel and tire setup, which currently is a set of Mark 8 GTI Autobahn wheels on Michelin tires. These wheels apparently originally came with the factory GTI Bridgestone tires, which I'm told were absolute garbage. And these Michelins have been great from a performance standpoint, but not so great from a longevity, and they're not super conducive to most road surfaces, as it turns out. We'll talk more about that later, and I'll overlay some pictures just so you have an idea of what I'm talking about. But aside from the wheel and tire setup, there's a few other visual things. There's this little lip spoiler that I'm actually not going to touch because it feels like it's going to fall off. The badge skins vinyls on the front, which I think look phenomenal, window tint, and the car overall is quite a bit lower, which does contribute significantly to the appearance. And of course, in addition to the spacers that are on it, it features a set of H&R lowering springs, and for the most part, from an appearance standpoint, they're great. From an actual driving standpoint, again, much like the tires, they're kind of a mixed bag, but when we hop in the car and drive in just a second, we'll go more into detail about that. And of course, there have been other modifications that you can't see under the skin, like the Unitronic tune and various coating changes through OBD11. So, as you can probably hear, this car does also now have an MBRP catback exhaust and aftermarket blow-off valve, which you can hear even better now that we've removed a little rubber grommet down in the firewall there. I wouldn't necessarily recommend keeping it like that because it is kind of drony after a while, but hey, it's fun for the moment, and it's probably makes it so you can actually hear it on the video. But luckily that, plus the tune, those two things have had a much more positive impact on this car, on the ownership experience of this car, than the suspension has. The suspension certainly does provide a handling benefit, and of course it looks phenomenal, but I complained in my original video with this car that it wasn't exactly a smooth ride. Now, I like a firm ride, but this one's just not very well controlled from factory, and what this suspension has done is just make it even stiffer, which, depending on your road surface, is either still barely livable or really, really annoying, as we've found out today and as Evan has found out on his numerous road trips in this car. But The tune and the exhaust, like I said, are both significant benefits. From factory, the GLI produces 228 horsepower and 258 foot-pounds of torque, but this Unitronic Stage 1 map, it's worth noting it's just the Stage 1, not the Stage 1 Plus, bumps it up to just under 300 and 350 respectively, which is a pretty solid gain. And considering that the Stage 1 doesn't require you to run on 93, you can get away with running 89 or 91, although it's not necessarily recommended for a long period of time. The cost increase as a result of being tuned is also more limited. And I believe the stock 0 to 60 of this car was just under 6 seconds. Typically the tunes on these Turbo 4s, in my experience, knock about half a second off the 0 to 60 time. So low to mid 5s seems pretty reasonable for this car, and it certainly feels like it. I will say it's definitely not as quick as the Elantra N that I just drove recently, nor is it as burbly, but it's still super fun. It's plenty of power. And aside from the annoying automatic upshifts that you can't get rid of, it feels great. It is also worth mentioning that compared to the modified GTIs I've driven, this car does handle this power level quite well. Mark 7 platform vehicles, in my experience, have always struggled with putting power down. They've always wheel hopped quite a lot, and this car pretty much doesn't, which is really impressive. And I'm sure different wheel and tire setups can contribute to that too, but a nice set of Continentals on a GTI versus a nice set of Michelins on this car, you know, really doesn't make that much difference at the end of the day. So I must say I'm impressed by that. What I may not be as impressed by, though, is the reliability, because I feel like that's something worth talking about for a 2-year owner's review. And let's be honest, Volkswagen has never really been known for that. They have gotten way better compared to the early 2000s, what I like to call the dark ages of Volkswagen, where they made things like the V10 TDI Touareg and the Passat W8 and the Phaeton and things like that. They were doing all this cool stuff, but none of it really held up very well. They have gotten better since then, definitely, unquestionably. But this car has had a few little one-off things that are worth talking about. One being a coolant sensor issue. I actually had a coolant sensor issue on my B9 S4 as well, but not exactly the same. Basically, the one in this car just isn't consistent. From what I've been told, it just kind of decides when you have coolant and when you don't, which I guess is the point of a coolant sensor, but it does it on its own. It doesn't actually do it based on the coolant you actually have in the car. And I'm told that the whole system has been pressure tested multiple times, and nothing's been actually found to be wrong with the system, so my guess is as good as yours on that. The most common issue on Mark 7s, though, is to do with the sunroof that you probably can't see in shot, even though I just pointed at it. Mostly on the cars with the full panoramic sunroof, this has been an issue, but of course they are always known to leak. Their drains get clogged very easily. That's an issue regardless of what model you have. But this particular one has been replaced under warranty because it was rattling quite bad. And then I believe after the fact the rattle came back again, or something along those lines. Basically, it's been replaced under warranty once, and frankly it should be replaced again, but it's not going to be. So my recommendation would honestly just be, don't buy a Volkswagen Mark 7 with a sunroof. Unfortunately, that's kind of hard to do because they package the sunroof on the Autobahn in this car with really all the tech that you would want, and the leather seats and everything. And on the GTI, it often gets packaged with the SE, which is one step up from base. So if you don't want a complete base model, it's hard to avoid. The last big issue that this car has experienced is to do with the occupancy sensor in the passenger seat. Effectively, just at random, all of a sudden, out of the blue one day, this car decided that it was going to have somebody in the passenger seat, even though there wasn't anybody there. So maybe it's haunted, actually. Maybe that's what it is. But eventually it did throw an airbag light, which of course is a problem because it won't pass inspection like that, and it's also just annoying. I'm sure the airbag itself, the rest of the airbags were probably working perfectly fine, but the seat sensor was bad. And I've seen this happen a lot on Kias. It's never a cheap fix on Kias, and I'm sure it wouldn't be a cheap fix on this car either. However, upon taking it to the dealership, the airbag light, the code for it was cleared, and hasn't been an issue since. So maybe it'll be an issue again in the future once it fully goes bad. I don't know. But either way, it's quite annoying. Overall, the last 2 years and 50,000 miles with this Jetta have been nothing short of excellent. It's been a great car, minus its few little random issues, but frankly, any German car is going to have those little sporadic issues sometimes. I know that more than anybody else. But unfortunately, due to financial changes and life changes and just the desire to change cars, I suppose, as well, I guess, Evan will be getting rid of this thing soon and replacing it with something else. What that exactly is going to be yet remains to be seen. I'm told possibly Volvo, possibly Mazda 6. There's a few different options, but either way, we'll undoubtedly do a video with whatever ends up replacing this car. But it will be a sad farewell for the GLI. It's been a great car. And with that, that's where I'm going to wrap this video up. As always, thanks for tuning in. And if you enjoyed it or found it informative, give it a thumbs up. And consider subscribing for plenty more content to come.